In our lesson today, we'll be sharing from Saint Germain's teaching that was so beautifully written down for us by Godfrey Ray King, whom we all know as the beloved Ascended Master Godfrey. And this teaching comes from the book Unveiled Mysteries. This book details Godfrey's experiences with Saint Germain during his embodiment as Guy Bellard. And we're starting out where Godfrey has already hiked up the side of Mount Shasta, and he was preparing to stop for a short while and rest and take some refreshments. And here is how Godfrey wrote about his first encounter with Saint Germain. And he says the following: "As the day advanced, it grew very warm, and I stopped frequently to rest and enjoy the full, remarkable stretch of country around McCloud River, the valley, and the town. It came time for lunch, and I sought a mountain spring for clear, cold water. Cup in hand, I bent down to fill it as an electrical current passed through my body from head to foot. I looked around, and directly behind me stood a young man who at first glance seemed to be someone on a hike like myself. I looked more closely and realized immediately that he was no ordinary person. As this thought passed through my mind, he smiled and addressed me, saying, 'My brother, if you will hand me your cup, I will give you a much more refreshing drink than spring water.' I obeyed, and instantly the cup was filled with creamy liquid. Handing it back to me, he said, 'Drink it.' I did so and must have looked my astonishment, for while the taste was delicious, the electrical, vivifying effect in my mind and body made me gasp with surprise. I did not see him put anything into the cup, and I wondered what was happening. 'That which you drank,' he explained, 'comes directly from the universal supply, pure and vivifying as life itself. In fact, it is life, and life here is printed with a capital L. It is life, omnipresent life, for it exists everywhere about us. It is subject to our conscious control and direction, willingly obedient, when we love enough, because all the universe obeys the behest of love. Whatsoever I desire manifests itself when I command in love.' And just a note, that love is also with a capital L. Beloved Godfrey continues, he says, 'I held out the cup, and that which I desired,' sorry, this is beloved Saint Germain, 'I held out the cup, and that which I desired for you appeared. See, I have but to hold out my hand, and if I used to wish to use gold, gold is here. Instantly, there lay in his palm a disc about the size of a $10 gold piece. Again, he continued, 'I see within you a certain inner understanding of the great law, but you are not outwardly aware of it enough to produce that which you desire direct from the omnipresent universal supply.' And I'd like you to keep this statement in your mind while we go through the rest of Saint Germain's words. It's very important. What he says here is, on the outer, we may not be aware and have enough awareness of what truly the power is within us to actually produce from the omnipresent universal supply, but we may have the inner understanding. Saint Germain continues and he says, 'You have desired to see something of this kind so intensely, so honestly, and so determinedly, it could no longer be withheld from you.' Now, as I was reading this again, and I have read this book multiple times, I'll give a little bit of insight how I came to actually get to read this book the first time around. As I was reading this during my preparation, this thought occurred to me. I desire to have a more personal communication with the masters, to remember clearly when I may have traveled to the octaves of light, and to understand at a deeper level the alchemy that Saint Germain is teaching here. Yet as I read his words here, the realization occurred to me that I have not put myself on the altar of my God presence, and I have not desired purely, intently, and honestly, as he states, and determinedly, as Guy Ballard obviously did, to the extent that the master could appear to him in physical form. So that is, for me personally, something that I need to work on. And my hope and here is that each one of us become or come into that realization of where it is that we may be not coming to the altar of our God presence or being there present 24/7 so that we can receive what is in omnipresent supply and be in direct contact with the masters. Beloved, Saint Germain continues and he says, however, precipitation is one of the least important activities of the great truth of being. If your desire had not been free from selfishness and the fascination of phenomena, such an experience could not have come to you. When leaving home this morning, you have thought you were coming on a hike. That is, so far as the outer activity of your mind was concerned. In the deeper, larger sense, you were really following the urge of your inner God self that led to the person, place, and condition wherein your most intense desire could be fulfilled. And I'm going to read that last part again because that is very important for us to pay attention to. So Saint Germain says, in the deeper, larger sense, you were really following the urge of your inner God self. To me, that is that still small voice that we often hear about. This inner God self that led to the person, the place, and the condition wherein your most intense desire could be fulfilled. And I would like to keep this particular statement in your form, in your mind as well, and fix it in your memory. I also want to share what we could probably call an affirmation. It was written in a book by John Randolph Price, and he calls it one of the 10 statements of principle for his 40-day prosperity plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about that 40-day prosperity plan a little bit later on. But the statement principle that he has here is this: through my consciousness of my God self, the Christ within, as my source, I draw into my mind and feeling nature the very substance of spirit. This substance is my supply. Thus, my consciousness of the presence of God within me is my supply. It's very important for us to realize that the persons, the places, the conditions around us in the outer is not where our supply comes from. It is directed for us by the presence of God and the Christ self within us. Saint Germain continues and he says, the truth of life is you cannot desire that which is not possible of manifestation somewhere in the universe. The more intense the feeling within the desire, the more quickly it will be attained. However, if one is foolish enough to desire something that will injure another of God's children or any other part of his creation, then that person will pay the penalty in discord and failure somewhere in his own experience. And then Saint Germain says, it is very important to realize fully that God's intent for every one of his children is abundance of every good and perfect thing. Jesus taught this, and the masters say this to us over and over again in every dictation. It is important for us to realize that God's intent for us is abundance of every good and perfect thing. He created us. God created us in perfection, and he endowed us, his children, with exactly that same power. Saint Germain says they can create, we, God's children, can create and maintain perfection also, and we can express God. dominion over the earth and all that is therein. Mankind was originally created in the image and the likeness of God. The only reason all do not manifest this dominion is because they do not use their divine authority, that with which each individual is endowed and by which he is intended to govern his world. Thus, they are not obeying the law of love by pouring out peace and blessing to all creation. Now, when we think about this statement that Saint Germain gave us here, God created us in perfection and he endowed us, his children, with exactly the same power so that we can create and maintain perfection and also express God in all of this creation that we can see in the physical world. So the question we probably have for ourselves is, why are we not expressing God in everything that we see? If we go throughout our history, we know from history, and we can think of Buddha and we can think of Jesus. And Buddha, in his meditation under the Bodhi tree and his alignment with nature and the natural forces that God has provided us with, he exercised dominion over nature. And he worked with the elementals and he worked with nature against the chaos that was around him at that time. And we can also go to our Bible and we can read the story of and read the teaching of Jesus when he fed the multitudes. He took 5 loaves and 2 fishes and he multiplied it to feed 5,000. And that's just a number we came up with in the Bible. It could have been way more than that. And the magical part of that is that there were baskets of food left over after that could continue to feed people. And everyone had had more than enough. Everyone was satiated with all the food that had been provided from 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now we can also look at our own beloved Linello. We've read from his life here in his last embodiment that there was a conference where food looked like it was going to be running out and not everybody was going to get food. And he was able to multiply that the food continued to be more than enough for every participant that was there. So the question again is something that we need to ponder. What is it when we look at our world today? Are we caught up so much in fear that we are just not able to express God and the dominion that he's given us? And that's something each one of us individually need to assess for ourselves. So let's go back to beloved Saint Germain's words. He says, and I'll reread the last sentence of what he said. He says, they are not obeying the law of love by pouring out peace and blessing to all creation. And then he continues and he says, this comes about through their failure to accept and acknowledge themselves temples of the Most High living God, and to hold this acknowledgement with eternal recognition. And I'm going to read that again. Very important statement. This comes about through our failure to accept and acknowledge ourselves as temples of the Most High living God, and to acknowledge that with eternal recognition. Saint Germain continues, he says, humanity, in its present seeming limitation of time, space, and activity, is in the same condition a person in need would be to whom someone held out a handful of money. If the needing one did not step forward and accept the money held out to him, how in the world could he ever have the benefit that it could bring? And we can apply that to ourselves as well. The mass of mankind is in exactly this state of consciousness today and will continue in it until they accept the God within their hearts as the owner, the giver, the doer of all the good that has ever come into their lives and world. So God is the owner, the giver, and the doer. And we need to make sure that we have space in our hearts for God, for all that is, that we're not doing everything in our world and just doing it by route, but that we pay conscious attention to that. So, beloved, Saint Germain continues, the personal self of every individual must acknowledge completely and unconditionally that the human or outer activity of consciousness has absolutely nothing of its own. Even the energy by which one recognizes the great God within is radiated into the personal self by the great God self. Love and praise of the great self within, the attention maintained, focused upon truth, health, freedom, peace, supply, or any other thing that you may desire for a right use, persistently held in your conscious thought and feeling, will bring them into your use and world, as surely as there is a great law of magnetic attraction in the universe. The eternal law of life is that whatever you think and feel, you bring into form. Where your thought is, there you are, for you are your consciousness. And whatever you meditate upon, you become. In coaching, we have a saying, pay attention to what you are paying attention to. And I'll be honest, the first time I heard that, it just didn't quite click in for me. But that is, for me, exactly what Saint Germain's words is saying here for us. Pay attention to what you're paying attention to what you are focusing on, because the eternal law of life is, and we all know this, we just don't outpicture it. Whatever you think and feel, you bring into form. There's another teaching that I've learned through the coaching realm that I'm in, and that is that everything is created twice. We create everything in our thoughts, and then we create it in our physical, good, bad, indifferent. We create everything twice. So it's really important to understand that everything comes through our thoughts first. And Saint Germain, a little bit later on, tells us that sometimes those thoughts are unconscious. We don't even realize they're there until we see the physical manifestation. So it is important for us to get to that point where we are aware of everything we think, that we make a conscious effort to be aware of what we think, and to make sure that that thought that we're putting out there, and that eventually then becomes part of the manifestation that we see in the world around us, is in the best interest of everyone around us, including ourselves, first and foremost ourselves, so that we can be what we need to be in this world, in this physical world. So Saint Germain says, and I'll just repeat that last part, the eternal law of life is whatever you think and feel is what you bring into form. And he talks about feeling a little bit more later on as well. He says, when one allows his mind to dwell upon thoughts of hate, condemnation, lust, envy, jealousy, criticism, fear, doubt, or suspicion, and allows these thoughts of irritation to generate within him, he will certainly have discord, failure, and disaster in his mind, body, and world. As long as he persists in allowing his attention to be held by such thoughts, whether they be about nations, persons, places, conditions, or things, he is absorbing those activities into the substance of his mind, his body, and his affairs. In fact, he is compelling, forcing them into his experience. And not to talk politics or anything, but I think if we look at our world today and we look at the chaos that's going on around us, how many of us are actually moved? And I know I'm guilty of that at times. How often are we moved by the stuff that we see outside of us, so that we are not centered in our God presence, within our Christ self, and standing in that light and holding the balance, which is what we came for. That's my personal belief anyway. All these discordant activities reach the individual and his world through his thought and feeling. Feeling often flashes before one is aware of the thought in the outer consciousness, which he might use to control it. And this kind of experience should teach him how great is the energy within his many creations, that which has accumulated through habit. And I'm going to talk a little bit about habit later on too. So in coaching, we are saying, as I said earlier, pay attention to what you are paying attention to. And as we start paying attention to it, the negative habits that we may have acquired to go off the rails when if things don't go the way we want it to go, that this paying attention to every thought, every action, every word we speak helps us to be more balanced and more in an equilibrium that is in peace and love. Saint Germain continues and he says, the feeling of activity of life is the most unguarded point of human consciousness. And we know that. We can see it in our world, in the outer today. It is the accumulative energy by which thoughts are propelled into the atomic substance, and thus do thoughts become things. Saint Germain says, I tell you, the need of guarding the feeling cannot be emphasized too strongly, for control of the emotions plays the most important part of anything in life. In maintaining balance in the mind, health in the body, success and accomplishments in the affairs, and in the world of the personal self of every individual. Thoughts can never become things until they are clothed with feeling. The Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit is the feeling side of life. God, the activity of divine love, or the mother expression of deity. And I must share with you, when I read that, the mother expression of deity, it just gave me such a feeling of joy to know where the mother aspect of our Father, Mother, God comes in for me. More than that, I can't explain it. It was there such an overwhelming feel of joy when I read that part. The Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit is the feeling side of life, God, the activity of divine love, or the mother expression of deity. That is why the sin against the Holy Ghost is referred to as that which brings such great distress, because any discord in the feeling breaks the law of love, which is the law of balance, harmony, and perfection. And I want to remind you here that law of balance, harmony, and perfection, Maitreya taught us about this. There key steps, key things that we can do to keep ourselves in balance, in harmony, and the expression of perfection. Saint Germain says the greatest crime in the universe against the law of love is humanity's almost ceaseless sending forth of every kind of irritable and destructive feeling. One day, the race will come to realize and recognize that the sinister, destructive forces manifesting on this earth and in its atmosphere, generated, mark you, by human thought and feeling, have only entered the affairs of individuals or nations through the lack of control in the emotions of everyone's daily personal experiences. Even destructive thoughts cannot express themselves as action, events, or become physical things, except by passing through the world of feeling, for it is in this phase of manifestation that the activity of coalescing the physical atom upon thought and that thought form takes place. As the noise from a sudden explosion shocks the nervous system of one who hears it, setting up a trembling sensation in the cellular structure of the body, in exactly the same way do the flares of irritated feeling shock, disturb, and disarrange the finer substance in the atomic structure of the mind, the body, and the world of the person who sends them out, consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally. Discordant feeling is the producer of conditions we call disintegration, old age, lack of memory, and every other failure in the world of human experience. The effect upon the body structure is the same as that produced upon a building. If the mortar holding the bricks together were to receive repeated shocks, and each day those were to be increased, this continued shock would shake apart the particles composing the mortar. The building would collapse into a chaotic mass, and the form be no more. And as he mentioned earlier, Saint Germain mentioned earlier, we can associate that or identify it to that of the body. As we go through these human experiences and irritation and failure, we are doing that to our own physical body. And we see the manifestation of dis-ease and old age and, aches and pains and things in the body and so forth. Saint Germain continues, he says, that is what mankind is constantly doing to the atomic structure of the human body. To give expression to the discordant thoughts and feelings in oneself is the course of least resistance, and the habitual activity of the undeveloped, undisciplined, and willful individual who refuses to understand the law of his own being and bring the personal self, which is but his instrument of expression, into the obedience to the law. He who cannot, who will not control his thoughts and feelings is in a bad way, for every door of his consciousness is wide open to the disintegrating activities, thrown off by other minds and the emotions of other personalities. It takes neither strength, wisdom, nor training to give way to unkind, destructive impulses, and the full-grown human beings who do this are but children in their development of self-control. And again, in today's world, we can see this so clearly in so many. Saint Germain continues, he said, it is a blight upon the life of mankind that so little control of the emotions has taught humanity from the cradle to the grave. Attention to this particular point is the greatest need in the Western world today. It is easy to give way to discordant thoughts, feelings, and activities, to be sure, because the mass of mankind is submerged, as it were, by environment and association entirely created by themselves. I want to just give a reminder here. These experiences that Guy Ballard wrote about was back in the 1920s, 1930s. And think about it, at that time, Saint Germain warned us that it is a blight upon the life of mankind that so little control of emotion has taught humanity from the cradle to the grave in the Western world. And look where we are today. We haven't learned any lessons. He continues and he says, the individual, through his control of the outer consciousness, must make the effort to rise out of this condition by his own free will in order to transcend these limitations permanently. No one can hope to rid his life or his world of misery, discord, or destruction until he leashes his own thought and feeling. In this way, he refuses to let the life, with a capital L, flowing through his mind and body become qualified by the discord resulting from every little disturbance occurring in the world about him. At first, such discipline does require determined, continuous effort, for the thoughts and feelings of 95% of humanity run as uncontrolled and free as a little tramped up. However, no matter how much effort it takes to bring these two activities under control, it is worth any amount of time and energy expended, and no real, permanent, let me start that one again. However, no matter how much effort it takes to bring these two activities under control, it is worth any amount of time and energy expended, and no real, permanent dominion of one's life or world can take place without it. It will be my pleasure, and this is Saint Germain that says this, it will be my pleasure and privilege to teach you the use of these higher laws, and their application will enable you to release true wisdom and bring about all perfection. Now, in this writing, he was making this statement to Guy Ballard, but we have dictations in the teaching that Saint Germain gives us on alchemy, where he makes exactly the same statement to all of us. If we will do our part, it will be his pleasure and privilege to teach us the use of these higher laws. And I will let you know in a little bit what the pearl of wisdom is that you can refer to for that. But the masters have told us, if we will do our part, they are there ready and waiting to help us. We just need to step up. In the next part, Saint Germain gives us a 3 or 4 step process that we can go through and apply every single day to raise our vibration and get to that next level. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, and as I read through this, to use it as a meditation. And in the bulletin, I have included some affirmations from what Saint Germain is giving us here. And these affirmations were given by him to Guy Ballard at the time. So Saint Germain says the first step to the control of yourself is the stilling of all outer activity of both mind and body. And he says 15 to 30 minutes at night before retiring and in the morning before beginning the day's work, using the following exercise will do wonders for anyone who will make the necessary effort. The second step, make certain of being undisturbed, and after becoming very still, picture and feel your body enveloped in a dazzling white light. So picture and feel your body enveloped and saturated in every cell, every atom of your body by the dazzling white light. The first 5 minutes while holding this picture, recognize and feel intensely the connection between the outer self and your mighty God within. So while you're holding this picture of being completely enveloped and saturated in every cell and atom of the body with this dazzling, crystal bright white light, feel and recognize the connection between the outer self and the mighty God within. Focus your attention upon your heart center and visualizing it as a golden sun. So feel your connection to your mighty God presence and Christ self. And then as you focus on your heart, see your heart as this brilliant, beautiful golden sun. And then Saint Germain says, the next step is the acknowledgement. And I'm going to read through this acknowledgement statement that he gives us here. These are included in your bulletin as affirmations. So I'm going to read them through, and then I'll read them through slowly, and I invite you to repeat them with me. So the acknowledgement is, I now joyously accept the fullness of the mighty God presence, the pure Christ. I now joyously accept the fullness of the mighty presence, the God presence, the pure Christ. And one more time, I now joyously accept the fullness of the mighty God presence, the pure Christ. And Saint Germain continues, he says, feel the great brilliancy of the light and intensify it in every cell of your body. And he asked us to hold that for at least 10 minutes long. Now we can't do that here, but I invite you, if it's within your purview, to go ahead and to use this exercise that is given us here on a daily basis, and to hold that feeling of the light and to intensify it for 10 minutes. And then Saint Germain says, then close the meditation by the command. I am a child of the light. I love the light. I serve the light. I live in the light. I am protected, illumined, supplied, sustained by the light, and I bless the light. And this is also in your bulletin, so I invite you to repeat this with me. I am a child of the light. I love the light. I serve the light. I live in the light. I am protected, illumined, supplied, sustained by the light, and I bless the light. Saint Germain continues and he says, remember always, one becomes that upon which he meditates. And since all things have come forth from the light, light is the supreme perfection and control of all things. Contemplation and adoration of the light compels illumination to take place in the mind, health, strength, and order to come into the body, and peace, harmony, and success to manifest in the affairs of every individual who really do it and seeks to maintain it. Saint Germain continues, he says, all the way down the centuries in every age, under every condition, we are told by all who have expressed the great accomplishments of life that the light is supreme. The light is everywhere, and in the light exist all things. That truth is just as true today as it was 1,000,000 years ago. As far back as there is any record of humanity, the wise and great ones of all ages are portrayed with a radiation of light about them, emanating from the head and body itself. And these are Saint Germain's words. And he continues and he says, the light is real, just as real as the electric lights in your homes. And he says the day is not far distant when machines will be constructed to reveal the emanation of light about every individual to the physical sight of anyone who cares to observe it. And I just want to interject here. This was back in the 20s, and I'm not sure when Kirlian photography came about, but Kirlian photography and aura photography is, to my mind, the kind of machine that Saint Germain is referring to here. So he does say such a machine will also show the contamination or discoloration that becomes a cloud around the light of God, which the personal self generates through discordant thought and feeling. And an aura machine or an aura photography machine will actually show you some of that. This and this only is the way by which the energy of the great life stream becomes polluted. If you will practice this exercise faithfully, Saint Germain says, and feel it in every atom of your mind and body with deep, deep intensity, you will receive abundant proof of the tremendous activity, power, and perfection that abides and is forever active within the light. When you have experienced this for even a short time, you will need no further proof. You become your own proof. The light is the kingdom. I'm going to say that again. Saint Germain says, the light is the kingdom. And remember, Jesus taught us the kingdom of God is within us. The light is the kingdom. Enter into it and be at peace. Return to the Father's house. After the first 10 days of using this exercise, it is well to do it 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. And then Saint Germain continues and he says, we often hear the complaint, oh, I cannot give all that time. To any who are of that opinion, I wish to say simply this. The time the average person spends in criticizing, condemning, and blaming people, conditions, and things for not being something other than they are, if occupied with this recognition and the use of the light, will make heaven manifest on earth for the individual who dares to try and has determination enough to maintain it. Nothing is impossible. The light never fails. The light is God. Saint Germain says the light is God's way of creating and maintaining order, peace, and perfection throughout his creation. Every human being on this earth can have all the time he wants in which to do this, when his desire to do it is intense enough. The intensity in the desire itself will reorder the world of people, conditions, and things so as to provide that time, if he earnestly wishes to use it for his upward climb. No person in the world is an exception to that law, for the intense desire to do anything constructive, when it becomes intense enough, is the God power that releases the energy necessary to create and express the thing desired. And so I want to remind you of a passage in the Bible. It's Joshua 10, verse 12. And it says, then Joshua spoke to the Lord on the day when the Lord delivered the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still upon Gibeon, and you, moon, in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun and the moon obeyed his command. Saint Germain continues, he says, everyone has the same supreme privilege of contact with the all-powerful presence of God, and it is the only power that ever did, does now, or ever will raise the personal self and its world above earthly discord and limitation. And this is where Saint Germain comes to the end of his discord. He said to Guy Ballard, my beloved son, try this with great determination and know God in you is your certain victory. And the masters have said that to us so many times. God in you is your certain victory. And then Gay Ballard, or beloved Godfrey, wrote as the last part here, as his discord ended, I began to realize that he must be one of the ascended masters, for he had not only given me proof of his dominion over the elements by precipitation, but had instructed and explained as he did it. So it is my hope that you got a lot from Saint Germain's teaching here. And what I would suggest to anyone who has any questions on this teaching from Saint Germain is go read this. It's the very first chapter in the book, Unveiled Mysteries. And the entire book has so many brilliant, beautiful teachings that Guy Ballard shared with us in his writing in that book. Now, before we close our lesson for today, I want to just read a little additional piece from A Pearl of Wisdom by Saint Germain. It was volume 5, number 32, and it is Studies in Alchemy, the Science of Self-Transformation. This is in the book, Studies on Alchemy, Studies in Alchemy by Saint Germain, and it's chapter 7. It's called Methods of Transfer. And he starts the chapter out as light is the alchemical key. Light is the alchemical key. The words, let there be light, are the first fiat of the creation and the first step in proper precipitation. When man, who himself is a manifestation of God, desires to emulate the Supreme Father and precipitate, as a true son of light should learn to do, he ought to follow those methods used by the Supreme Intelligence if consistent and worthy results are to be anticipated. By examining the obvious methods of the Creator and by observing nature, you can deduce much of value if you will school yourself to think independently. For it is necessary to bypass mere human syllogism and to penetrate the limitless consciousness of God, who is the great master alchemist. God is the great master alchemist. And in order to go and do likewise, ever beholding your service as good. And then he completes that out and he says, in precipitation, a rapid expansion of the light rays in 3 dimensions must occur. And in the screen method, the optical image is on a flat single plane dimension. He was talking about explaining how a TV screen works. Saint Germain also says a study of cytology and embryology will provide the student with some understanding of how a single cell multiplies and reproduces. And just a very brief interjection there. We think about the moment of conception of the human embryo or any living being. There is two single cells that come together and then they multiply extremely fast to eventually produce a human being. And they cannot do that without the light of God that actually brings that together. Saint Germain continues this: when you are dealing with instantaneous manifestation, the velocity and intensity of light must reach startling speed and power. It must be realized that the exercise of such control over matter by the mind is no ordinary process. While I do not say that ordinary people cannot master the technique of executing these laws, and that the most humble individual cannot be invested with or invest himself with such authority within the inalienable rights that God gives to man, I do not wish a sense of frustration to arise within those who may attempt to precipitate and then just feel discouraged because they apparently fail. And he says, apparently, I say apparently because the law does not fail. In most cases where direct precipitation does not occur, if the effort and the technique be pursued in full faith that the call compels the answer, an indirect precipitation will sooner or later be brought about, whereby through one hand or another, desired manifestation does take place. So just again, that Pearl of Wisdom, where you can read this from, and there's a series in volume 5 that actually includes all the chapters from the Studies in Alchemy book. So avail yourself of that teaching of Saint Germain. It is very brilliant. And as we close, I'm going to share the statements of principle for the prosperity plan that was included in the book by John Randall Price. He has a book, he's called it the Abundance Book, my apologies. And I want to read these statements of principle to you because I find them so in alignment with the teaching of Saint Germain here, as well as so many of the teachings that we have in our dictations. So I invite you for a moment to close your eyes and just to drink in these 10 statements. So statement number 1 says, God is lavish, unfailing abundance, a rich, omnipresent substance of the universe. This all-providing source of infinite prosperity is individualized as me, the reality of me. Number 2, I lift up my mind and heart to be aware, to understand, and to know that the divine presence I am is the source and substance of all my good. Number 3, I am conscious of the inner presence as my lavish abundance. I am conscious of the constant activity of this mind of infinite prosperity. Therefore, my consciousness is filled with the light of truth. Number 4, through my consciousness of my God self, the Christ within as my source, I draw into my mind and feeling nature the very substance of spirit. This substance is my supply. Thus, my consciousness of the presence of God within me is my supply. Money is not my supply. No person, place, or condition is my supply. My awareness, understanding, and knowledge of the all-providing activity of the divine mind within me is my supply. My consciousness of this truth is unlimited. Therefore, my supply is unlimited. Number 6, my inner supply instantly and constantly takes on form and experience according to my needs and desires. And as the principle of supply in action, it is impossible for me to have any needs or unfulfilled desires. Number 7, the divine consciousness that I am is forever expressing its true nature of abundance. This is its responsibility, not mine. My only responsibility is to be aware of this truth. Therefore, I am totally confident in letting go and letting God appear as the abundant all-sufficiency in my life and affairs. Number 8, my consciousness of the Spirit within me as my unlimited source is the divine power to restore the years the locusts have eaten, to make all things new, to lift me up to the high road of abundant prosperity. This awareness, understanding, and knowledge of Spirit appears as every visible form and experience that I could possibly desire. Number 9, when I am aware of the God Self within me as my total fulfillment, I am totally fulfilled. I am now aware of this truth. I have found the secret of life, and I relax in the knowledge that the activity of divine abundance is eternally operating in my life. I simply have to be aware of the flow, the radiation of that creative energy, which is continuously, easily, and effortlessly pouring forth from my divine consciousness. I am now aware. I am now in the flow. Number 10, I keep my mind and thoughts off this world, and I place my entire focus on God within as the only cause of my prosperity. I acknowledge the inner presence as the only activity in my financial affairs, as the substance of all things visible. I place my faith in the principle of abundance in action within me.